Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Grant. As I've said to several of you who've been on waiting patiently for this webinar to begin over the last 15, 20 minutes, I'm your host, and with me is Mark Baldwin. I think we're about 100 away from each other as the crow flies across the corner of one or perhaps two Great Lakes. But a big welcome to all of you wherever you are, and I think we're pretty geographically spread out across North America, as I was saying a moment ago. Let me give you an idea of where we're going for the next hour. Mark, our presenter, after I introduce him, will speak for 25 to 30 minutes, and then he will take your questions for another 30 minutes. At that point, I'll ask you to fill out a short evaluation, and all those of you who do that will be eligible to win a free one-year digital subscription to Green Teacher, our nonprofit magazine for youth educators. But you don't have to wait, by the way, to ask a question, and you have already jumped into the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And if you have any questions, if you've got technical difficulties, or you just want to make a comment, Mark says something and you want to comment on it, feel free to do so in the chat box. And the way you do that is down where it says main room in the bottom left-hand corner. You type something into the empty horizontal box to the right and hit enter. Your name will appear, as you can see in the chat box right now, and your comment will be seen by everyone. If you simply want to send me a message, you can click main room and find my name and just send me a quick message, and I'll try and sort out any problem that you're having with it. Okay, and of course, during Mark's presentation, I'll respond to as many questions and help out in any way I can. If you're not familiar with Green Teacher magazine, for the past 20 years, we've been publishing in this quarterly magazine some innovative articles, activities, and lesson plans developed by environmental educators inside and outside K-12 classrooms. And in the past 10 years, we've also had the pleasure of publishing 6 books, mostly comprised of articles that once appeared in the magazine, but which were rewritten for the books. Green Teacher remains an unprofitable nonprofit, as some of you know. If you find tonight's webinar useful and you're not yet a subscriber, please do consider taking out a subscription or purchasing one of our books. That'll enable us to keep continuing this series of free webinars. And as you heard moments ago, this presentation is being archived, and anyone, you can certainly recommend, pass on to your friends, encourage them to have a look at it if you find it well, share the details of it on Facebook, but you don't have to take notes tonight, in other words, because you can go back and check any part of the archive that was of particular interest. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce Mark Baldwin. He has served as the Director of Education at the Roger Tory Peterson Institute of Natural History in Jamestown, New York, which is basically southwest of Buffalo, where for the past 20 years he's worked with teachers to infuse their curriculum with the outdoors and the natural world. He has a special interest, obviously, as per being the host of this webinar, in keeping nature journals to observe and record natural events and in teaching the discipline to others. He's had a long-time interest in place-based education, especially creating maps and using them as tools to evoke a sense of place in both children and adults. And I have to say, I first worked with Mark when we published one of Green Teacher's, what became one of Green Teacher's all-time most popular article entitled Teaming with Nature in Teacher number 74. You can read about it on the back issues part of our website. But it described how middle school students could map out the natural and built features within a 1 square kilometer around their school. A fabulous piece. Needless to say, it's fair to describe Mark as a jack of all trades when it comes to natural history education. Welcome, Mark. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that nice introduction. First of all, I want to tell you that successful science teaching and learning depends on certain scientific habits of mind or skills. And we're going to be focusing on nature journals as a way of getting at those skills and helping your students to develop facility with those skills in an effort to help them be better scientific inquirers. So successful science teaching and learning depends on noticing. That is, making accurate observations, wondering, that is, asking the kinds of questions that lead to productive scientific inquiry, and explaining, that is, plainly communicating what you've learned. And one of the best methods for cultivating these skills that I know of is to keep a nature journal. Now, before I move on with the presentation, I want to emphasize that although this webinar will focus on the application of nature journals to teaching science and learning science, nature journals fit into a wide variety of instructional and interpretive settings, and in both formal and non-formal settings. I'd be interested to know if you've had experiences using nature journals with your students or the groups you work with. So would you please take a moment to tell me something about that using the chat box? I'll give you all a minute or so to respond. Yeah, I see mention of using journals in school, in graduate school, using them in a nature center setting, using garden journals, using journals in the field of phenology, second grade students, high school ecology, using journals in sit spots, using nature journals in the garden, the forest, and the beach. Beginning to keep a journal on your own, which it's essential. I'll talk about that later on, but this is not something you have students do and you don't do it yourself. You really need to get into it yourself. This is giving me a really, really great idea of the extent of your experience with journals, and I think it's going to help me to do this presentation too. Excellent. Well, that's great. You can continue to add additional answers to that, but I just wanted to get an idea, and I'm really, really glad for the response that I have here. Okay. In our discussion this evening, we're going to be considering journals in two interconnected ways. Nature journals as process and product. A lot of science instruction, while it claims to be otherwise, ends up more learning about science than actually doing science. Now, nature journals are tools for drawing learners of all ages and competencies, and as I mentioned before, this includes teacher as learner too, into the authentic practice of science. In other words, the process part of keeping a nature journal. Once teacher and students start on a nature journal adventure together, the journals, both individually and collectively, become a growing body of original source, first-hand reference material for engaging in science and shared inquiry. So it turns the classroom or the Nature Center program from individual students, individual children, learners, into a community of learners. In other words, what we're talking about here is the product. So keeping nature journals is both about the process and the product. In this webinar, we're going to introduce the basic tools for keeping nature journals, introduce a set of exercises to make nature journaling a part of how you teach science, and discuss practical applications for nature journaling in the classroom and the field. Now, the tools that you need to get started with nature journaling are really very simple. You need a notebook. And if the notebook has blank pages instead of pages with lines, that's the best. You also need a pencil. You should have a viewfinder. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then you also need a hand lens. Now, first of all, the notebook. Notice that there's no lines in this kind of journal. Lines could box you into a certain kind of journaling, journal keeping. And I like to keep my journal free and clear to begin with so I can hold it horizontally or vertically. I can sketch in it. I can make notes in it. Now, if I want to have horizontal lines or grid lines or any kind of lines, you can always download that material from like that website that I have indicated there. And something else that I didn't put on this slide, but it would be a good idea for you to jot this down. This is a website, a company that sells blank books. I like them. They're called Bear Books. So it's bearbooks.com. And they're relatively inexpensive. They're just plain white journal books with plain white pages in them, so you can pretty much do whatever you want with them. And since they have blank covers, that also leaves you a lot of opportunity for putting some kind of a design or picture on the cover too. Now, another thing you need for keeping journals is a viewfinder, and it's just a 3x5 card or 5x8 card that you've folded in half, and you take a pair of scissors and cut through that fold and cut around the edge there and then unfold it, and you've got yourself a viewfinder. So it's like seeing the world through the lens of a camera. And there are a number of reasons why that viewfinder is a good idea to have with you. Just kind of tuck right into your nature journal and have it available for you anytime you need it. And then the other tool, simple tool, but it's really essential in the process of keeping a nature journal, and that's a hand lens. Now, see, the boy using this lens, it's just an inexpensive plastic lens, but he's getting the most out of it by holding it right up to his eye, blocking out the distractions and focusing his attention on the object. Good job. Now we're going to introduce a few exercises that are good training for the process of keeping nature journals. These exercises are all useful for developing observation skill or the skill of noticing, question asking skill, the skill of wondering, communication skill, the skill of explaining. Now, simple, truthful first-hand observations are the touchstone of the scientific enterprise. For centuries, scientists have used notebooks, logs, journals for recording their observations. Keeping the journal in itself helps to train the eyes and other sense organs to perceive with accuracy and verity. And the more you observe and record, the more likely you are to note patterns, discrepant events, anomalies, the things that are so important to scientific investigation. Now, as for wondering, practicing the skill of noticing, that is, to discern details of an event as well as the context within which an event occurs, propels the observer into the process of inquiry. Inquiry is all about living into new insights about the world, what it consists of, how it works. All questions asked sincerely are good questions. Good teachers know this. But you'll have to admit that some questions are definitely better than others. The aim is to ask the best questions that you can, and this depends on how good your observations are. And then finally, the journal is a personal record and original source material that can be of value to yourself and to others. A group of students engaged in first-hand learning in this way can make great use of each other's journals as each practices the skill of explaining to others exactly what he or she saw. Now let's get into these exercises. The exercises that we're going to introduce this evening, there's just three of them that I want to bring to your attention. And one of them is called pure contour sketching. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as blind contour sketching. The second one is observational sketching, often using a hand lens or a viewfinder to focus attention. And then the third one is sound mapping. So the first one that I'd like to address with you is pure contour sketching. So what you see there on the slide are a few pure contour sketches and the little seashell that was the object of those sketches. One of the blockages to seeing and recording exactly what you see is the brain's natural tendency to boil everything down to a symbol. Human beings become stick figures, trees become lollipops, and so on. Symbolizing the world is important to everyday life. We'd never be able to communicate without it. However, in order to see things well enough to ask good questions about them, we need to see the details, the particularity of things. We need to trick our brain into viewing the commonplace as something new and interesting. A fun way to play this trick is using an ancient drawing technique known as pure contour sketching, also known as blind contour sketching. It's been taught by art teachers to art students for hundreds of years. Now, to do this, you look closely at an object you want to get to know better, like that seashell, for instance. Then you place the point of a pencil on a journal page, and then let your eyes begin to explore all over the object, all the interesting ins and outs, while your pencil does the same thing on the piece of paper. The trick is to keep your eyes on the object the whole time. When you're finished, look at your sketch, and it'll look funny. Lines that are supposed to be connected won't be, proportions will be off, and so on. But that doesn't matter at all. It's the process here that counts. Now here's a student looking at an object. She's just looking at this plant that's off to her right, and she's making a pure contour sketch of it. The act of sketching the object in this intentional manner almost immediately shifts her state of mind into what I call a condition of discovery readiness. And see, her pencil is wearing a paper plate, so there's no way she can be distracted by her sketch. Now, after she gets finished with her sketch, this is a process led by the teacher. She's got her students doing these pure contour sketches, and then she takes advantage of this cognitive shift that her students have all gone through by having the students write at least a brief response to each of these two prompts. I noticed, and I wonder. Doing this simple written reflection drives home the point of the pure contour sketching process, which is to sharpen these essential skills and position the student for discovery. In effect, opening the door to scientific inquiry. And a brief period of sharing things noticed and wondered about may also stimulate discussion about directions that their own scientific inquiry might take, what are the characteristics of an investigable question, and so on. Once you've played with this technique for a while, you may feel more comfortable about observational sketching. It's like the comparison might be, you're out in the field and you're keeping the field journal. You may not be using that technique in the field so much as the next technique that I'm going to address here, and that's observational sketching. But you really need to do this pure contour sketching and begin to feel comfortable with letting your hand with a pencil or pen wander over the page while your attention is focused on an object. So here's an example of one of these observational sketches. a couple of sketches of the insect, and then there's also some labels there that go along with it. Now here's a student doing an observational sketch, and so she's observing this plant, and she's copying it into her journal as accurately as she can. She actually has one of the seed pods from one of these plants on a piece of paper, and she has the viewfinder framing that opened seed pod, and it looks like there's some other plant material there too. And so she's observing that, and she's trying to copy it as accurately as she can. Now, this disciplined observational sketching is simply a modified form of that pure contour sketching I showed you a minute ago. Instead of looking at the object the whole time you sketch, though, you look at it most of the time. So if you're doing a pure contour sketch, you're spending 100% of your time focused on the object, 0% of your time looking at your paper and pencil. With observational sketching, it's modified. You might say 75% of your time is spent looking at the object, 25% of your time is spent looking at the paper and pencil. In this way, your sketch will represent the object itself and not your biased preconceptions about it. There's a really good question here that just popped up, and it's what's a good age to begin contour sketching or close observational sketching? That's a really good question, and I think I think you're probably right when you say that very young kids, 5 or 6-year-olds, would be too young. I think developmentally, the eye-hand coordination, probably you can probably start taking advantage of that by the time the child would be in what I would consider the middle elementary years. Certainly by 3rd grade, it's appropriate to have students do this and do it successfully. Younger than that, I mean, it certainly wouldn't hurt them. I'm just wondering whether it would really be productive or not. When I have teachers doing this in workshops who are in early childhood education, I teach them these techniques not with the expectation that they would have their students do it. It would not be productive to try these techniques with kids who are 4 or 5 years old. But I'll address your comment here too. What I try to do with this technique is to help the teachers develop the capacity to see the world with the same level of newness and freshness and curiosity that their young children, the young students do. So I think it's really valuable for teachers to do this because it helps you to free up this kind of stiltedness that we go into adulthood with as grown-ups and begin to see the world with new eyes the way young kids do. And I see that you also said, on the other hand, you have a friend who teaches art to very young students, and they do some amazing observations. You don't know how she does it. It'd be great to find out what kind of techniques she's using to develop that observational capacity in young children. I'm really interested in that myself too. So notice that this student, and the student she's in the picture there, she's a 4th grader, and she's using a viewfinder. And what it's helping her to do is forcing her to make her sketches small and manageable. You see how she set this up? First of all, she has a little box drawn on the journal page, and what I would suggest is that you actually use the viewfinder as a template to trace the outline, so your drawing ends up being very much the same scale as the thing that you're looking at that you're actually framing there in the viewfinder. So the other thing that it does, in addition to keeping her drawing small and manageable, kind of like a thumbnail sketch, is that it helps her to eliminate distractions. She's not concerned about anything that's outside of that viewfinder. She's just looking at what's in that little box. Now, notice that she's also got a hand lens there handy, and hand lens is also great to keep on. Just keep it close to you. Keep it on a piece of string hanging around your neck to observe details. the added benefit is seeing the object in a new and interesting way, just in case you start finding it looking too familiar. Now, the other thing about viewfinders is this, I want to just point out, is that scientists do a lot of measuring and systematic recording of measurements as part of their work. And because our brains have a tendency to exaggerate the size of some things and minimize the size of others, it's good to get into the habit of using a viewfinder as a tool for sizing up and measuring things. You can even add a centimeter rule to the sides of your viewfinder if you want to use it as a tool for measuring things with more accuracy. Yeah, I see your comment here about using, I'm just going to go back here for just a minute, about the comment of sort of the inauthenticity of having the object in the classroom. Well, it's wintertime, and the teacher has had the students do a scientific inquiry activity of taking seeds, planting them, going through the process of having the plants flower, pollinating the plants, and then finally going through the full life cycle. And doing that under controlled conditions, especially in the wintertime here in Western New York, is really the only way to do that. So. But yeah, I agree with you 100% that doing this in the outdoor environment, like if there were a butterfly garden or just going out into the schoolyard and looking at the trees and so on and using the viewfinders to get a close-up look at stuff, that's really the best way to use these, no question about it. Now, sound mapping is a way of recording what you're hearing into your nature journal. We have a tendency to be really focused on the visual recording of things, but of course we got 5 senses. So let's think about ways that we can incorporate observations using our other senses. And sound map is really a good way of doing this. It works well with kids and grown-ups of all ages. And the way a sound map works, I don't know how well you can see on this slide, but in the upper left-hand corner, there's a circle. And in the middle of that circle, there's an X. And the X represents the position of the observation. And what you try to do with a sound map is just listen. And each time you hear a sound, record something about that sound within that circle. Circle represents the area around you that you can hear 360 degrees around you. So the things that you hear in the quarter in front of you are going to be near the top of the circle. Things behind you will be the bottom, to the right, and to the left. And things that seem to be far away, maybe way out toward the edge of the circle. Things that are in close to you are near the middle of the circle where you're located. And I did this sound map, and I was doing this in a prairie environment, beautiful, beautiful environment in western Minnesota, and I was hearing all kinds of prairie wetland birds, swamp sparrows and song sparrows, and red-winged blackbirds and yellow-headed blackbirds, and just having a great time out there recording all the chirps and zips and whistles of all of these different birds. But then it was really puzzling me were the insects that were in close by. Some kind of grasshopper or cricket or something was making some sounds that were really, really puzzling to me. And so that's a lot of what that down there at the bottom is about. Now, I think after you've made a sound map, it's good to reflect on it. Think about the soundscape that you've occupied. Oh, and I should also mention here, I'm going to go back to this slide again, is getting to the point about labeling. And with sound maps, of course, this is essential. It's important to put the date, the time of year, the place where you are, but it's also important to put a note about the time of day as well. because the soundscape can really change from one time of day to another. I also think it's important to put a note about the weather. And after you've made a sound map, you can reflect on your observations in a number of ways. But I like this asking about sounds sort of like 5 fingers on one hand. First of all, with your pinky finger, what sounds were natural? And you might go back to your sound map and look at a sound there that you recorded and say, well, there's a natural sound, and draw a circle around it. And then ask yourself, what sounds were caused by people? A car door slamming, or a truck driving down the highway, or an airplane flying overhead. It's almost impossible to be in any natural surroundings. I mean, even deep in the wilderness, it's really hard to get away from any sounds whatsoever that are caused by human presence. So you might put a box around those sounds that were caused by people. And then what sounds were pleasant? Just to indulge yourself and just think about, wow, if I could just hear that sound all day long, it would just really, really make me happy. And maybe you want to put a heart around that. And then ask yourself what sounds were annoying, and put an X through sounds that seem to be disruptive or grating to you. And then finally, sort of like the thumb in all of this, counting down the 5 fingers of your hand into your thumb, that opposable thumb, such an important digit. This question is really important. What sounds were mysterious? Because you're bound to hear some sounds in any soundscape that you can't immediately identify. And what that does is it propels further inquiry. If you put a question mark next to those sounds that are mysterious to you, those are the sounds that you're going to want to go out again, find the place, maybe sneak up on whatever it was that was making that sound and try to answer that question, just like a curious scientist would. So then here are a couple of samples, student samples of journal entries. And just to reiterate some of the things that we've talked about here, that the date, the time, location, a note about the weather, that sets the journal entry in time and place. So when you go back and refer to it later, there will all be all these memory jogs. Okay, all of these things that you recorded there. Not only are you going to be able to sort of experience those, but there probably will be other sensory memories that you'll have about that experience too. You may hear things, even if you didn't record them in your journal, that recollect it, a smell, and so on. Now this student has done a nice job with labeling her observational sketch. She must have been in a wetland there. She recorded that, and it is correct. That is a spotted touch-me-not that she has here. You can sure tell that. She's called this out and recorded a little close-up view of one of the blossoms. That was nice. It's a nice touch. And then she's also written something about the experience over here on the right-hand page. It's appealing to look at, too. It's like a picture book. There's a nice balance between the visual record, the labels that help to elucidate it, and the information that she's recorded in words. Now, sometimes a teacher wants to or needs to be quite specific about what the assignment is. I mean, this is another application of the Nature Journal to a scientific investigation going on in the classroom. This is a crayfish investigation, and the teacher might have said something like this. Today, each of you will be observing a live crayfish. As you observe, you'll record what you see in your journal with a series of labeled sketches. Your objective is to discover how many appendages a crayfish has, how they are alike and different, and how the crayfish uses them. When you're finished with your observation, you should be able to tell me 3 things you noticed, about crayfish appendages, and 3 things you have questions about. So this student, again, has included a heading that includes the date and location, a labeled observational sketch of what he was seeing, and there's a circle there that indicates on the left-hand page that indicates a magnified view that shows the use of a hand lens to take a closer look at the legs. And then he also indicated things that he saw, and other things, in other words, the things that I noticed, and the things I have questions about. I wonder. So now I would just go back to that question that I asked you there at the beginning. How would you use, or how do you use nature journals in the science classroom and in the field? Now I want to go back and address this question and any other questions that you have, any other comments that you have. I do want to get a couple of pages of resources up here, and I did not do an extended kind of bibliography here, but these are just some of the most important resources I can think of to get you started on keeping nature journals. And I want to say something about a few of these. Drawing instruction is a way to help you be a better scientific observer. And so and of course there is a disciplinary transfer between science and art. They complement each other in many, many ways. We know this as educators. But even if you don't have the intention of becoming an artist in the sense that you want to do painting or sculpture, learning how to draw, learning how to render helps you to become a better observer. It helps you to see things, to recognize and record the particularity of things that will help you to be better at teaching science as a discipline. So the drawing instruction texts that I picked out here, one of them is probably one of the best sellers of all time as far as drawing instruction. It's Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards, and it comes in various editions, but I think that's the most recent one there, the one that was published in 1999. And then the one underneath that is sort of the granddaddy of all drawing instruction books. It's The Natural Way to Draw by Kaiman Nicolaides. Now, Kaiman Nicolaides, I should just throw this in too. Roger Torrey Peterson, the great naturalist of the 20th century, the person for whom the Roger Torrey Peterson Institute is named, because he was born and raised here in Jamestown before he went on to a spectacular career as a nature educator. He learned how to draw in part by Kaiman Nicolaides himself. When Nicolaides was an instructor at the Art Students League in New York in the late 1920s and early 1930s, when Peterson was getting his drawing education, art education in New York. And to this day, I mean, you can still get this book, even though it was, published half a century ago or more. It's still a fantastic way to begin learning how to draw. Even if you don't do all of the exercises in the book, it's extremely rigorous. And then, sort of a counter to the visual drawing on the right side of the brain, is Gabriel Rico's Writing the Natural Way. Really a good book. And then to get you into the process of doing more in the line of nature drawing and journaling instruction, I have them listed here in alphabetical order, but probably going down to the bottom one there, keeping a nature journal. If you're going to get one book to start out with to begin a nature journaling library, that's the one. Keeping a Nature Journal by Claire Walker Leslie and Chuck Roth is an awesome book. Claire Walker Leslie is one of the best known, at least in North America, one of the best known nature journaling writers, commentators, and instructors. And I just think very, very highly of her ability to reach people with this message that keep a nature journal. There's so many great reasons to do it. And then the other three there, they're just three people who I hold in very high regard. Kathy Johnson, The Sierra Club Guide to Sketching in Nature, a great book. Hannah Hinchman, from more kind of evocative of Western landscapes. I believe she lives in Montana. A Trail Through Leaves, the journal as a path to place, is just a really good inspirational guide. And then one of my favorite New England writers and illustrators of children's books, Jim Arnosky, Sketching Outdoors in All Seasons, is just another really, kind of a homespun, but it's a great drawing instruction book too. So those are some that I think would be a really, really good resources to begin a library about nature journaling.
Great. Well, Mark, thank you so much. This is great. And boy, what an active chat room we've had this evening. It's
we have. I can't even keep up with it.
Well, it's a good thing. What's really striking, of course, is that when you put on a webinar on a given topic, half the people who come and sign up for it have a fair bit of expertise and are looking for more ideas, and the other half, of course, are new and interested, and we certainly saw the experienced people sharing their ideas and their questions in the chat box. So if you can now bring us to that end of I think we're going to move on to another slide. We have an open-ended question just next. And we'll come back to this one again a little later.
Gotcha. Okay, I see it now.
Great. Okay, folks. So, and some of you have already asked questions, and Mark's addressed a few of them, but I'm going to assume that there are still other questions out there. So take a moment, type one into the box, and press the submit button. If you have a second question, just put one in at a time, hit submit, and then you'll get a fresh screen to type a second question. And I'll go to the back office and start retrieving them and passing them on one by one verbally to Mark to answer.
Casey asked
Mark,
a question. Sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to address this question that was just in the chat box here about what size journal do I use mostly with students. I don't know if Casey was asking that of another participant or of me. I've always kept these like 5.5 by 8 journal books myself, and I recommend them just because they're easy to carry around. It's a relatively small size, so it's not taking up a great, whole lot of room. But I think if you're working with younger students, bigger is better. If a larger page for them to work with, I think, it just gives you more latitude and there's more workspace there. But I think we just also have to remember not to have students necessarily make their entries the size to think of this great big piece of paper as something that you have to fill up. So you're maybe breaking it into the large page into smaller sectors, maybe an area where you would want students to write something, another area where you would want students to draw something, and direct them in that way. That would help to make the process a little bit more directed. And if money is an issue, those bear books, they're about $1 a piece, and I know that's out of the range of some people's price. If it comes down to actually, just making something on your own, I mean, you can do something with pieces of paper, typing paper, and copy paper and construction paper, and make something yourself quite inexpensively too.
Mark, a couple of questions. A couple of people are asking about journaling with very young kids. One, in fact, asks, would you do any journaling with kids who cannot yet read and write.
Yeah, and I think what I would do in a situation like that, and this is not because I have any education as an early childhood educator myself. I just hang around with people who do it. And several times a year, I work with early childhood educators, and what I'm getting from them is if you're going to have young students doing journaling, that you do this as a kind of as a big book activity where you allow the students on a large sheet of paper, like flip chart paper, to make pictures, images, things that they see, using the colors that they've seen in nature. If you want the students to learn something about shapes that they see in nature, transferring that to onto a piece of paper, I would think that having a group of students all working together on the same big sheet would help them to, again, develop this capacity to see something and transfer it to something that they've recorded. That is a way to bring young children into the process of journaling without their having to keep a little journal themselves.
Mark, so let's leap from very young kids up to older kids. One person is asking, do you have any suggestions for how to, if you're teaching a high school chemistry class, how you might use journals in a high school chemistry class?
Great. I love the idea of keeping a journal as a tool that you bring with you into the lab. And you're thinking about it, of course, chemistry teachers have had their students use, pretty, I think what we use, and I don't remember what they're called, but it's a composition book with graph paper in it instead of lines. If you use that as the tool for recording, that's fine. But again, if you have a journal that has blank pages in it, that provides you with all the latitude for recording things that you would be doing in a lab. All the formulas involved in the lab setup and writing down the procedures and going through the process. If you have your students actually going through the process of asking their own questions and coming up with hypotheses and designing experiments, I can't think of a better place for recording the process of doing science than a journal. And if I could just go beyond this too, if you can discipline high school students to use a journal as a tool in an interdisciplinary way, then you're really a step ahead. Because as you know, as a chemistry teacher, you want your students to be able to communicate the observations that they've made in the lab, the things that they've seen happen when you mix various chemicals together and see what goes on. And you're using math, so you're using the ability to write and read. So all of these things fit in together in the process of keeping the journal that goes beyond the sort of pedestrian way of having students record things in a lab logbook.
Thanks, Mark. I want to move on to a more slightly controversial topic, I guess, in this field. And I remember almost 10 years ago, we had two wonderful articles in Green Teacher magazine, back to back, about nature journaling. But what was dramatically different was one person passionately argued against grading nature journals, and the other argued just the opposite. And I have to say, both were very coherent and made compelling arguments. What's your take on grading nature journals?
Okay, first of all, those beginning entry-level exercises, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of having your students develop the capacity to make. We don't necessarily, through normal traditional education, teach our students how to make effective observations. And so having your students do like that pure contour drawing, that's not something you grade. You ask the student to participate, to be to actively engage in the activity, but that is not something that you can say that one student gets a B plus and somebody gets a C minus. That is not the time for grading. I think that should always be done in a very non-judgmental, non-evaluative atmosphere. So that's not the point of it. But later on, I think that it's entirely appropriate for a teacher, once the students' basic skills have been laid down. I mean, you can compare this in some way to layup drills and practicing free throws and dribbling and basketball practice. Now, sure, the coach is going to be assessing the progress of the players on the team, but the proof is in the game. Now, the game for nature journaling is actually going into the field and making clear-minded observations of things that you didn't know about before, and making the kinds of observations and asking the kinds of questions that will lead to productive inquiry. I think at that point, that's where you start grading and you start assessing the ability of a student to do that. If you know that they've got the basic skills in hand and they feel comfortable with those skills, I think that's fine. So I guess I come down on, you don't want to start assessing and having students who may be a little bit slower than other students in catching on to some of these things, shutting down because they're being, you're running the risk of a kid saying, I don't know how to draw. I'll never be able to learn how to do this. What you need to do is be encouraging, because everybody has the ability. If you have the eye-hand coordination necessary to write, you can draw in this way. You just have to learn how to feel comfortable with it.
And Mark, you've kind of answered the next question. I knew I'd get a nuanced answer from you on that, and you did very well. The question related to that is several people have asked, and you've in a way answered it, which is the barrier of kids saying that they just can't draw. And any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are so many students who are affected with various conditions that make it difficult for them to sit still long enough so that they can do this. Now, that's one situation where it's important just to work individually and as patiently as you possibly can to bring them along. Now, on the other hand, sometimes those students respond really, really well to just where amazingly you sit one of these kids down in front of an anthill and say, just watch what's going on there and record it as you see it. And they might do a really, really good job with it. So it might just involve, being open-minded and trying some different things. Now, the other kind of student that you might have is just the perfectionist, the one who sits up straight in her chair and she complies with everything that the teacher says, and she's learning how to be a really, really good student in a traditional setting. Given this, which is really more open-ended, it's more it requires something that a measure of independence that you don't necessarily have, independence in the sense of being able to make your own decisions about things that some students don't really latch on to. So you're going to have kids at both ends of that spectrum there, and all I can say is just be patient and don't give up, because all of those kids have the capacity to learn how to do that. If they're getting to the age of 10, 11, 12 years old, where developmentally they want to make their pictures look accurate, if they can't, the reason is that no one taught them how to do it. And you may just be the first one who's come along to actually teach them that this has nothing to do with any giftedness or talent that they lack. It's just that nobody's taught them the skills. I compare it to the state that we would be in as far as education is concerned if we didn't do any kind of intentional instruction of reading and writing. If kids learned how to read just on their own, by the time kids got into 6th or 7th grade, one or two kids in each class would know how to do it. Everyone else would say, this just isn't. I'm not talented. This is just not something that's for me. I just don't think we ought to treat drawing any differently than that. It's just we have to learn how to teach this as a process, and in the process, coming back to nature observation and developing the capacity to do scientific inquiry, I think we can be a more creative and scientifically inquisitive society by doing this too.
And Mark, is there a kind of a minimum amount of time that one should allow students or visitors to a nature center to do nature journaling?
Even a little bit helps. Go ahead, Tim.
So in other words, when you say a little bit, even if you've only got 20 minutes or 15 minutes, would you still encourage people to take the time to do some of these things?
I would. I think that even a minimal amount of time, like 40 minutes or an hour spent doing this, it's valuable because not only are you providing them with an experience they can look back on and say, okay, I looked at that in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise. That makes a difference. And then they also come away with a skill and maybe a little sense of success, like, gee, I didn't know I could do that, and now I think I can. So those kinds of teaching and learning experiences are invaluable. They go really far beyond the content. I mean, the temptation, especially if you're in a nature center situation, to use those small blocks of time to present the visitor with a kind of a wow, an animal to look at or something like that. That's wonderful too. But engaging with it is really the important thing, and I can't think of a better tool for engagement than these journaling techniques.
Mark, we have a question from someone who's working with adults and older kids, and I think she's probably doing it at a nature center because she said she is going to have these groups in each of the 4 seasons in this year of 2012. And so she wanted sort of a 2-part question. Any particular tips different than those you've referred to with younger kids? Any different tips for working with adults? And number 2, how would you, if you're doing seasonal sessions like this with periods of time in between, any suggestions on how what recommendations that you would have for people in her situation who want to keep the participants enthused and active in between the sessions that they do with her?
Okay. Here's a kind of just a suggestion to tie the whole thing together. You say you're going to be working with these adults over a period of several months. They will be not with you the whole time. I think having them all do an investigation of a common thing might help to tie the whole thing together. And what I'm thinking of is having the participants do an investigation of the moon. The moon it's there. It's in the sky, somewhere in the sky. It may be below the horizon where you are right now. It may be obscured by clouds, but it's there. It's a natural object that's there all the time, and it's observable quite a bit of the time, again, depending on where you happen to live. Here in Western New York, we get little teasing glimpses of it every now and then. But if you had those adults looking up into the night sky and making a sky map. Now, it might require a little bit more time and instruction than I have right here in this short answer to talk about what a sky map is. But basically, in your journal, you've got a big circle that represents the bowl of the sky, and what you would ask the participants to do is record the moon exactly as they see it, in the position in the sky right where they see it. Also record the time of day or night that they see it. And the purpose of doing this long-term investigation that ties this work with these adults together is that they're all looking at the same thing, and there's lots of things you can wonder about having to do with the way the moon behaves. It's always surprising to me. I should never presume how much adults know about or don't know about things that are going on in nature, and the moon is a perfect example of that. It really is remarkable how much you can learn just by making firsthand, careful, disciplined observations of that. So that's just an idea. If you're working over the course of a year, you're also looking at least several lunar cycles. About one every month or so. So it provides lots of opportunity to do this kind of noticing and wondering that I'm talking about.
And Mark, I have a very different kind of question for you because we have several left, several more questions to ask you. Do you have another 10 minutes that we need to do the end of session evaluation right now for those that have to leave, but do you have an extra 10 minutes you could hang around and answer a few more questions?
Oh, I'd be happy to stick around. Sure.
Okay. So, folks, as I mentioned earlier, if you could take a moment, I've popped up the 5 questions. They don't take more than a minute or so, minute and a half to complete. And we'll leave these up on the screen for at least 2 minutes. So please take your time to answer them. And I'll answer another question that was of me by one of the participants, one of you, which is, can you get a certificate for participating in this webinar? And the answer is yes. What you need to do is simply send an email to Green Teacher after the session. You can send it to me directly at tim@greenteacher.com and say, Tim, I need a certificate. Here's the information that needs to be on it. So in other words, you need to have the name of your educational institution included and the address. Then please send all that information to me, and I'll happily send you a certificate that you can use in your professional life. And again, those of you as an incentive to fill out this end of session evaluation, we are doing a draw tomorrow of 2 of you who have to win a 1-year free digital subscription as a token of thanks. The filling out this evaluation is always very, very helpful to us and gives us good feedback on other topics that we should be organizing webinars to address. So another 30 seconds or so, and Mark, I've got another question I'll ask you while we're waiting, and let me just grab it again just a sec. Oh yeah, someone said, when teaching science, would you use other tools than a nature journal? And in other words, is this the only tool that you would use when you're teaching science?
I'm not sure how to answer that question because I'm not sure. Is the question, does it pertain to a particular age group or science discipline or?
Yeah, the person doesn't say, so I'm not sure, and it's really just saying in general. She's just sort of asking a broader question about science teaching. In other words, are nature journals so important that you would use it in virtually every science lesson?
Okay.
As opposed. Go ahead.
Again, in the formal education setting, sometimes you don't have the latitude to just use certain tools to the exclusion of others, and if the question is about science education in the non-formal setting, or in a situation that is a formal classroom, but you've got lots of choices, I would say one of the most important choices you can make, one of the most important decisions you can make as a science educator is to cultivate in your students the discipline of making first-hand observations and realizing the value of those observations. And there certainly are ways that you can make and record observations of things. I mean, there are various tools that are necessary for seeing things in new ways. Hand lenses and microscopes and telescopes and so on and so forth. But as far as something that's low cost that you can take with you, and it's such a convenient thing, the journal and a selection of writing and drawing tools spending time in that way is in many ways more valuable than other kinds of instructional techniques, just because of the practice that the student is getting as he or she records things in the journal is improving in their memory, their observation skill, their question asking skill, and so on. So I'm a real proponent of using journals, but it's one of those things that many teachers think, well, this is really a good idea, but then it sort of goes by the wayside because it really does require discipline. It's work. Doing the kind of observing and question asking and explaining that scientists do is work. So if you're willing to have your students take on that task, then nothing that I can think of has more sort of bang for the buck, I guess, is the way I'd put it.
Thanks, Mark. And that way, I think what I'd like to do is close the end of session survey evaluation in about 15 seconds. I see one person's having trouble advancing down to 3, 4, and 5. There's a couple of ways of doing that. If you can't get the blue bar on the right-hand side of the screen to slide down and expose questions 3, 4, 5, the other way to do it is simply click in the middle of the slide, and with your another 10 seconds with this, and then with the end of session evaluation. And then what I'd like to do, Mark, is to have you, or maybe I'll do it, is put up that slide that has your contact information so people can grab that too while they're listening to you answer yet another question in just a moment. And I should mention too, by the way, I'll be sending an email to all of you. Thanks, Mark. To all of you tomorrow, sometime or the day after. I'm not sure. Probably Friday at this point. With Mark's contact information, with the URL to check out the webinar. The archive version of the webinar, and so, which you can of course share with other people. They'll have to register for a webinar in order to be able to view the archived version, but that's okay. And do the same. They have to go through the same steps as you did, in any case, that'll be coming to you on probably on Friday at this point. So, thank you. And if you didn't have time to fill out the evaluation, don't sweat it. I see a couple people had trouble, but I do appreciate those of you who have done it so far. So, Mark, one more question, which is. Someone asked early on, and I didn't get this question before, which is, can you speak to the value of actual drawings produced when doing pure contour sketching?
The value of the drawing from an aesthetic perspective, I can I can speak to it from a couple of different perspectives. First of all, just looking at pure contour drawings are very aesthetically pleasing. They certainly are to me. They are the complete opposite or counterpart to symbolic rendering, and there is this, there's this sense that when you have completed a pure contour sketch, and then you look at it, and it does have this kind of whimsy about it at first. It's an odd-looking drawing, but then you start looking at it from a more from a critical perspective, as an artist would view a piece of work, and it's amazing how beautiful they are. So there really is a lot of value to the pure contour sketches. So it's not just about the process, but the products can really be beautiful too. But then, when you look at the pure contour sketches from a more scientifically critical point of view, what you will find in almost every case is that there are details of those renderings that are spot on accurate. I mean, it's like it has been drilled into your senses, into your brain, what that scale or that process or what that stem or whatever it is that you are looking at there so closely, precisely because you were observing it so closely. You really get the idea of what that thing is all about. So I certainly don't discount the value of the pure contour sketches from either one of those points of view.
Great. Well, as you can see, Mark, quite a few people have stayed on for this extra 10-15 minutes, and with good reason. You've really provided us with a fabulous overview and lots of detail and about how to use nature journals here. I've learned a lot through this session, and you can see it from the accolades and the positive comments that are pouring into that box. And someone even asked a moment ago, do you do workshops? And I quickly and enthusiastically said, yes, he does, on your behalf, Mark. So I hope that's still true.
It is. Yeah. We do face-to-face workshops, and they can be of varying lengths and for various purposes. I do workshops for people who work in non-formal settings like zoos and nature centers, and as well as folks who do classroom-based instruction, and it can be anywhere from an hour or two, half a day, full day, even longer. And sometimes we develop long-term relationships with groups and organizations that have an interest in this kind of teaching and learning. So it can can go on and on. I've made so many good friends all over. It's all about developing a greater awareness and appreciation of nature through these kind of techniques. And I also offer these in some other online settings as well. I've done some online workshops with our local community college as both credit and non-credit offerings too over the years. So if any of you are interested in finding out more about it, I would just encourage you just to give me a call or shoot me an email, and I'd be delighted to pick up a conversation with you about it.
And Mark, I well remember half a dozen years ago, perhaps a little more now, that I invited you up to a Canadian Environmental Education Conference, a big one, a few hours north of Toronto, in the Precambrian Shield, what's called the Canadian Shield, and I heard nothing but praise for the wonderful session you did for us at that conference. So no surprise that we're getting great feedback here tonight.
Well, it's very kind of you to say that, and thank you. Oh yeah, I go to Canada at drop of a hat. I love coming up there to visit you folks, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. So just give me the excuse.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for taking the time to join us tonight's webinar, and thank you, Mark, for being such a fantastic presenter. We have more webinars coming up, one tomorrow night, in fact, a couple next week, so do come back and check us out. And again, Mark, thank you so much for all the work you've put into this. It was terrific.
You're most welcome, Tim. And again, I thank you very much for the chance to do this. It was interesting too. I've never done a webinar before, so this was really fun just to kind of figure out how all this works. And it sure was fun to meet all these people online and to work with you again.
Great. Let me just turn off the archive here, and we can chat a little bit too.